Lewis Goodall's latest reflections on the BBC are not merely a criticism of one employer, they are an anatomy of what happens when great institutions lose their confidence, when bureaucratic reflex replaces editorial courage, when fear of criticism becomes a greater motivator than commitment to truth. In 10 minutes, one can trace through his essay and interviews a lament, a warning, a diagnosis of institutional decay. I think Lewis Goodall is worth his weight in gold. I mean, I wouldn't share all his opinions, but I certainly admire his spirit and his skill. Goodall's account of the BBC is that of an insider turned reluctant dissident. He describes the BBC as once inspiring reverence, yet now hollowed out by its own neuroses. The problem, he suggests, is not partisan bias, but managerial cowardice, a culture where bureaucrats have become more powerful than journalists. His words echo what many former correspondents have said privately, that risk aversion and image management now dictate editorial behaviour more than journalistic instinct and ethics. The corporation's real bias, Goodall insists, is not left or right, but towards timidity. At the centre of his criticism lies his experience under Sir Robbie Gibb, a former Downing Street communications chief and now BBC board member. Goodall recounts being told by editors to be careful, Robbie is watching you. He describes a culture where a board member with overt political affiliations to the right could exert improper influence on editorial work, chilling journalistic independence. His point is not simply personal grievance, it's about governance. When those charged with safeguarding impartiality are themselves politically compromised, the concept of impartiality itself becomes performative, becomes theatrical, rather than principled. And that is why Goodall invokes Charles Moore. Moore, the former Telegraph editor and Thatcher biographer, recently claimed the BBC's bias is uniformly liberal. Goodall's rejoinder is deft. Only someone who has never worked inside the corporation could think so. I think Charles Moore is a splendid man. I adore his biographies of Thatcher. But he's wrong here, and Goodall is right. The BBC, Goodall argues, fears conservative backlash far more than progressive complaint. It bends rightwards under pressure precisely because it's terrified of being seen as left-leaning. That imbalance of fear, rather than any deliberate ideological slant, is what distorts its output. It results in the beige centrism that Goodall calls the intellectual crouch position, bland, nervous journalism that offends no one but enlightens no one either. And that's a profound point. Goodall distinguishes between being impartial and acting impartially. No journalist is free of views, he admits, but good journalists strive to keep them out of their work. The greater danger comes from those who believe themselves neutral by default, whose own ideological assumptions are invisible to them. That, he says, is the ailment of the ailing older British middle media class figures who think their worldview is the national norm. It is a moral vanity disguised as impartiality. In his essay, Goodall's sympathy is not with managers but with journalists, the BBC's most valuable asset, and the ones it too often fails to defend. His recollections of being investigated by the editorial complaints unit after a colleague lodged internal complaints borders on the Kafkaesque bureaucratic apparatus designed to discipline, not to protect, the creative core of journalism. The message was clear: keep your head down, don't rock the boat. Many of the BBC's brightest have since left, Goodall, Maitlis and Sopel among them. Goodall's wider analysis is shrewdly political. He notes that the BBC's current crisis, the Trump panorama edit, the resignations of Tim Davie and Deborah Turness, is not just about a single error. It's been weaponized by the right-wing media ecosystem obsessed with undermining public service broadcasting and amplified by populist politicians in Britain and the US. The result is a paradox. The BBC apologises for an editing mistake that harmed no one, while remaining silent in the face of systematic campaigns to destroy its credibility. Its failure to defend itself, Goodall argues, has made it complicit in its own diminishment. Yet his essay is not anti-BBC, it's a plea for a BBC worth defending, one capable of fearlessly impartial journalism, not fearful management of impartiality. His target is managerialism, not the idea of a public broadcaster. The BBC, he believes, still matters. Still matters. But it must rediscover its backbone, its imagination, its intellectual curiosity. Until then, it will remain a vast, frightened bureaucracy, one that treats the people who do not work as expendable, and those who manage them, one that treats the people who do the work as expendable, and those who manage them as untouchable. Goodall's criticism, in truth, is rooted in affection. The BBC made him want to be a journalist. It shaped his political awareness. That is what gives his disillusion such force. He's neither ideologue nor rebel, simply a reporter asking why the institution that once stood for fearless inquiry now trembles before every headline. It's a question that matters not just for the BBC but for all British public life. Who in the age of outrage will stand up for the truth when it offends power? I don't think it's going to be something like GB News, is it? GB News invites people to come and talk on their channel and then leaves them sitting in the waiting room and then tells them to go. There was a woman who was asked to go on GB News the other day to appeal for her son who needs medical care, and she's set up a fund and has got quite a lot of donations. I can't remember her name now. But she was invited to GB News and then ignored and told to leave. It's outrageous. I would be horrified if there was a story about like that coming out of the BBC. There isn't. The stories coming out of the BBC are different. But we need a national support for good journalism. And at the moment, the BBC isn't offering that. The BBC is offering managerialism. I mean, it might as well be the NHS. It does the same job. Bureaucrats are more important than the people who are actually at the cutting edge, offering the service to the public. That's wrong.